What's going on, YouTube? Happy New Year's and welcome back to another video on the channel. I figured I'd make this video talking about the 11 through 16 Super Duties, my truck being a 2013 6.7 in specific. I wanted to go ahead and make this video because with the new year, these trucks are now about 9 years old all the way up to 14 years old if you have a 2011. And in addition to that, it's right about next week will be 2 years that I've owned this truck, and in those last 2 years I've put 18,000 miles on it. I bought it with 157,000 and I just rolled 175,000 last week. So I wanted to talk about my experience owning a steel body, especially because now these trucks have a lot of newer ones that have came to replace them. Ever since they got rid of this body style, as a lot of you guys already know, they came out with the aluminum ones in 2017. And then in 2020, they got a new 10-speed transmission and a different front end. And then they really changed a lot of cosmetics all over and the interiors in 2023. So now these trucks are officially 3 body styles old as well. Being that they're 3 generations outdated will be the cause of my first reason that you should get one of these, which is going to be the price. You could pick one of these up for like half of the price as it would cost if you wanted the new body style, just because everyone wants the latest and greatest. But I think it's a lot more worth it to get one of these and save your money, because you're still going to get a lot of the same features as the newer ones. Like you're only really missing out on the 10-speed, which I would actually argue is worse than these 6-speeds, so I'd prefer that. And the aluminum body for no rust, which kind of sucks, but everything else on these is pretty much the same. You've got the same great 6.7 engine, and like you still got the same nice suspension up front with coil springs. It'll ride the same as a new truck, make very similar power to a new truck. A lot of the features are the same on these, obviously depending on the trim levels, but that still depends on the new ones. But you could still have your leather interior. A lot of the same packages are still on the new ones that they offered back on these. These still have heated and cooled seats. Still have a nice touchscreen radio like the new one, power folding mirrors. It's got, like when you're driving one of these trucks, it is very similar to if you had a brand new one, but at a much cheaper cost. And while we're on the topic of cost, I'm going to say not only is it nice to have one of these because you're not spending as much money, or even worse, if you were making payments on it, you'd have a much smaller payment. But that also means what a lot of people don't think about, which is the depreciation on a steel body is going to be a lot less than on a newer one, because they've already depreciated a lot more before you got it. You can get under 200,000 mile good condition steel body like this one for roughly 25 to 30,000 easily, and you could probably find them for even cheaper than that if you're patient or if you get a lower trim level. And a lot of the 2017 and up aluminum trucks with under 200,000 could be anywhere from 40,000 all the way up to 100,000 if you get a new one. So if you think about it, your potential loss if you drive one of these for a few years, if you buy it for 30,000 right now, and in 10 years you'll get easily 20,000 for it, as long as you don't put tons of miles on it and you keep up with the maintenance. I mean, you look at old 7.3s still held their value, so I can see the same happening with these. I would say these are worth it, especially if you're a Ford guy and you want a Ford diesel and you don't have the money for the newer trucks and you want an older one. This is probably your best bet for a used Ford diesel that's a little older, because everyone knows the 6.0s and the 6.4s are effectively junk. They have way too many problems, way too many expensive repair bills, where it could kind of scare you away, which these tend to be a lot more reliable than those. And a lot of guys will mention 7.3s, which I have a 7.3 as well, and I love those trucks. But I will say that these are much better than a 7.3 and don't really cost that much more, just for the simple fact that they're a lot newer, have a lot more modern features. They make a lot more horsepower. They don't have cold start issues like you can run into on a 7.3 when they get worn out. So I'd say these are definitely a good choice. in comparison to any of the other older Fords. Now, with that being said, these do have some of their drawbacks. You know, if you were going to compare this to a 7.3 and you have like a CP4 failure or something, you're going to be looking at a huge bill that you will never run into bills nearly as big on a 7.3 in comparison to this. Like, you could get a 7.3 transmission rebuilt for $2,000, and a 6.7 trans, they're like $5-6 at least. So that's something definitely to consider. That is definitely something to consider for a downside if you're thinking about picking up one of these, is that they could be a lot more expensive to maintain than something much older like a 7.3. I'd say it's cheaper to maintain one of these than a 6.0 or 6.4, but a 7.3, these could definitely cost a lot more in maintenance. The other issue with these is as they've aged, if you live in the Rust Belt, the rust has had plenty of time to catch up to you on one of these. Luckily, I have very minimal issues myself. But if you are someone who lives in the Rust Belt and you want to own one of these for a long time, or you buy it already in the Rust Belt, you are going to run into rust issues eventually. It's inevitable, where maybe it's worth it to you to skip over this body style and maybe buy a 2017 and up so you don't have to worry about rust. A lot of these will need bed rail replacements in like 10 years of being in the Rust Belt easily if they're not undercoated or if it gets driven a lot. And mine is very minimal, but I've got a couple bubbles starting on this cab corner on this side, as you can see, which sucks. So in a couple years, I'll probably have to cut those out and weld in new ones. Which if I would have got a newer truck, I wouldn't have that problem because they're aluminum and they don't rust. Staying with the same topic of the age of these, they're new enough to have the new features, but these steel body trucks are also old enough to have wear and tear problems, especially if they're not maintained correctly, such as, you know, basic stuff, brakes, ball joints, front end rebuilds, which I've had to do all of the above on this truck, idler pulleys, belt tensioners, serpentine belts, a lot of stuff like that might not be big issues and they might not cost that much, but they could definitely add up buying something that's this old. Getting back into some reasons why you should buy these, I will definitely say the 6R140 transmission that is found in these steel bodies has a way better reputation than the 10 speeds in the 2020 and up 6.7s. So if that's something you're worried about running into trans problems, you might be better off buying one of these versus a newer one because of avoiding that big transmission bill. A drawback of these for sure could be the emission systems. If you're still emissions compliant, that could be a problem for you. But a flip side of that is if you own a steel body versus a newer one, specifically referring to a 2020 or newer, it is much easier and cheaper to tune and delete one of these because you could order everything to your house, plug and play, versus on a newer one, you're going to have to send out your computer to be reprogrammed somewhere else, and that'll cost a lot more. So that could be definitely a good reason to stick with the steel bodies in 2025. With that being said, that'll pretty much wrap up this video. This truck's giving me very little issues so far, and I really do like it. Makes a lot of power, very comfortable, very quiet. The nicest truck I've ever owned a daily drive for sure. While it does have a few drawbacks here and there, I think any vehicle does. And for the money, I think you can't beat these trucks. Even in 2025, I think they're still worth owning. So with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one.